Psalm 19. Balance is an important part of life. We all know that we should stay away from extremes, but there are times that we catch ourselves one end or the other, like a pendulum that never stops in the center. Sometimes we come back from one extreme and we may pause a minute at a balance and we keep going to the other extreme. The kids are dismissed to go down the journey to Jesus, by the way. I told you, Cindy, I wouldn't remember. The kids are dismissed to go down the journey to Jesus, which has begun today. But we look to stay balanced, and it's a constant job to remain balanced in our opinions and our actions, and particularly in our ideology, because our ideology is where everything else stems from. What we truly believe is how we react, how we speak, how we talk. Ellie Maxwell, co-founder of Prairie Bible College, is quoted as saying, "The hardest thing in the world is to stay balanced." Now, he's not the only one that understands the principle of balance. Thomas Merton said, "Happiness is not a matter of intensity, but of balance, order, rhythm, and harmony." Ricky Langford said, "Balance, the ultimate goal." Christian Olson said, "Like anything in life, find the balance between too much work and being too lazy. Between spending too much and being a Scrooge. Between being gone all the time and being in each other's way. Between talking each other's ears off and dead silence." Someone else has said you have to balance reason with passion. Reason keeps you open. Passion keeps your adrenaline going. Someone else has said living in balance and purity is the highest good for you and the earth. And then there's this interesting one by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Everything in the world is this marvelous balance of beauty and disgust, of magnificence and rats. And I just think it's a reminder that balance is something that is important for us to focus on. Now, some things go together, and in life, there are a lot of pairs. A lot of two things that go together. I'm going to try something today, and I'm a little nervous because when I do something that I haven't really written down, I usually have trouble. But I'm going to try something. I'm going to say half of a pair, and I want you to say what I'm thinking, okay? My Sunday school class has to do this every Sunday. Milk and cookies. Cookies. What'd you say? Honey. Milk and honey. Oh, yes, see, milk and honey. There you go, see? Ham and cheese. Ham and eggs, right. Macaroni and cheese. Thank you. Thank you. Peaches and cream. Shoes and socks. Table and chairs. Clark Kent and Lois Lane. Beauty and the Beast. Cleopatra and Caesar. Romeo and thank you. Holmes and Moriarty. Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty. Batman and Robin. Samson and James and John. It's a little obscure. Mary and Joseph. Right. That's just, it's interesting that we have a lot of pairs, and actually as I was doing that, there's a lot of trios too. You could come up with three things that are together as well, but it just reminds us that balance, that there's a lot of balance in society, there's a lot of balance in the world, there's a lot of balance in the scriptures. And as you read the Bible is full of principles and concepts and ideas that we have to hold in balance. Free will and sovereignty. Choice and God's choosing and predestination imagination and our desire, our willingness to choose. Law and grace. You know, as you go through the Scriptures, a lot of things we have to hold in tension. We cannot get so far off on one thing that we forget that there's another side. There has to be a balance in many things. I would encourage you that as you read the Bible, find those balances, find those places where we hold two things equally in tension and stay in the middle of those two things. In Psalm 19, we have this balancing act, and I think it's an important balancing act, partially because the psalm itself is probably somewhat familiar, particularly the first part of the psalm, which gives one side of the balance. If you begin in Psalm 19, verse 1, the psalmist announces, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament shows His handiwork. Day unto day utters speech. Night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them He has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices like a strong man to run its race. Its rising is from one end of heaven, and its circuit to the other, and there is nothing hidden from its heat." God's glory is revealed in creation. If we want to see the magnificence of God, we merely have to look at creation. We merely have to look and see what God has done. Michigan is a great place to see that. You don't have to travel far to see the glory of God in creation and in all that God has done. Just drive up to the falls. Drive up to the UP. You don't even get that far. God's glory is revealed in nature, in creation. And creation speaks to us. Creation talks to us. It says there is no speech nor language where His voice is not heard. Their line, and that word line in the Hebrew means their proclamation, their announcement. Their proclamation has gone out through all the earth. And their words to the end of the world. To the simpleton, the sky is just sky. The mountains are just mountains. The fields are just fields. To the naive, creation is nothing more than plains and hills and valleys. But to the wise, to the astute, creation reveals an amazing God, an amazing Creator, a glorious and powerful God who made all of this. We don't look at creation and say, wow, that's amazing. We look at that and say, wow, what an amazing God that made this. It speaks to who God is. The New Testament reminds us, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it to them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Creation reveals God. In creation, we see God's attributes, even His authority and even His eternalness. Now beware, we don't worship creation. One writer has said, the Babylonian hymns to Shamash, the Egyptian hymns to various sun gods, even the glorious hymn to Aten, differ in one remarkable respect from Psalm 19. In those psalms, nature itself is deified. The gods are praised in nature. Yet in Psalm 19, nature is personified, not deified. And personified nature raises the chorus of praise to the only Creator and only Deity, the one true God. The heavens and firmament, day and night, light and darkness are part of creation. They are not God's. We stand in awe of creation, but we bow to God. Now, I'm going to kind of step out here. Again, like my Sunday school class, it's going to be a mini rabbit trail, because Psalm 19, the one side of the balance is creation. Now hold that thought for a second, because right here we have this balance of standing in awe of creation but not worshiping it. We are not pantheists. Creation is not God. We don't worship the trees. I don't care what Pocahontas says. We don't worship creation. It points us to the Creator. And that's a balance that we have to have. While we stand in awe of creation, we have to be careful that we continue to worship God. And we need to honor both. We need to honor creation and honor God, but we worship God. And that's kind of a balance within the balance inside of Psalm 19. Now, what is the balance that Psalm 19 talks about? Well, as I said, on one side is creation. On one side of the scale is creation. On the other side of the scale is law. Look at verse 7. Verses 7 to 11. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned, and in keeping of them is great reward. The instructions of God, the commandments of God, the guidance of God are as awe-inspiring to us as creation. When we see what following God does and following the guidelines of God, whether you call it law, and by the way, the word law in verse 7 is Torah, which is the Hebrew word for law. It is the testimony and the statutes and the commandments that are laid down in Jewish literature and in Jewish oral tradition and Jewish written tradition. But when we see what God can do and what God's law does for humanity when it's followed, we stand back in awe. We're amazed by it. There are 6 things that are talked about: law, testimony, statutes, commandments, fear, and judgment. Those 6 things. Because of time constraints, very briefly, law are precepts, statutes. Thus saith the Lord, period. Thank you very much. That's law. When God speaks, that's the end of the conversation. Do not say any more. That's law. And by the way, that's okay. All right? That's okay. The second one, testimony. This is what God has done for me. The importance of watching and seeing what God has done for people. The testimony of what God has guided us through. Statutes are mandates and decrees, simply the guidelines. There's a way which seems right unto man, the end thereof is a way of death. We follow what God has told us to do. Walk this way. These are the guidelines that I give to you. Commandments are simply that, commandments. Again, very, very close to statutes. Fear is moral reverence, respect, and honor. And then judgments are just that. We kind of come full circle with law. When a judge makes his final decision, that's it. I was thinking of our system of our judicial system today. If you don't like what the lower courts say, you go to another level of court, and I don't know all the courts, district and state. You can finally, if you want to go that far, you can work yourself to our Supreme Court, our federal Supreme Court. But when those judges pound the gavel and give their verdict, that's it. It's over. And that's what judgments are. We cannot live in a world without boundaries. Now, what's happening in society today is that people are removing boundaries. And you see the chaos that ensues. We cannot live, we cannot work. Can you imagine working in a job that has no rules? We can't do that. We cannot live without boundaries. In the mid-90s, Montana decided that they didn't need a posted daytime speed limit. Enough people complained, and enough petitions were signed, and enough people went to Helena, the capital, and said, look, our roads are good enough, the traffic is sparse enough, the weather is decent enough, we don't need a posted daytime speed limit. So in 1995, they took out all the speed limit signs. You drive through Montana in 1995, you would find no daytime. Now, there was a nighttime speed limit, but there was no daytime speed limit. However, there was a daytime speed limit, and it was, you had to follow the basic rule. That's how the law spoke. You had to follow the basic rule. The basic rule is what is reasonable and prudent. What is reasonable and prudent. Look at the road conditions, look at traffic conditions, look at weather conditions, and then you make a reasonable and prudent decision as to how fast you will drive. That lasted 3 years. 1998, Montana Supreme Court threw that law out saying it was unconstitutionally vague. Basically, nobody knew what to do. What I had actually heard when they threw that law out was the courts were so clogged with people challenging their tickets that the courts could get nothing done. When there is no law, there is chaos. When there are no boundaries, there is chaos. And now there is a posted daytime speed limit in Montana. I believe it's 75, although they're talking about raising it to 80. Whatever. Following God's boundaries converts the soul. Following God's boundary turns us back to right. Following God's boundaries gives us structure in which we can live spiritually. I would assume that in a congregation of this size, we probably have differing political views. We're supporting maybe different candidates for president. Let me ask you this. Does anybody, and don't answer please, does anybody believe that the way our candidates are acting today is proper? Does anybody, I can't imagine that even they think how they're carrying themselves is acceptable. Except for the fact that they continue. The whole system is derailed. Why? Because somebody's not enforcing the boundaries. I don't even know who's supposed to enforce the boundaries. But they're not enforcing boundaries, and that has led to this joke that we call a campaign, and this travesty that we call debates, and I don't even know what you would call them. But it's because somebody's not enforcing boundaries. You can't say that. You can't do that. You need to be silent while if somebody's not doing something because it's become derailed, and somebody needs to bring it back, hopefully before the election, although I'm not sure that'll happen. Spiritually, sin has derailed us. We're off track. We need to be brought back on. That's what God's law does. God's law makes the simple wise. God's law makes the heart rejoice. God's law enlightens our eyes. In other words, helps us to see truth. It helps us to see right. God's law endures forever. I was told one time when I was in seminary, and you go out and they say, when you get to a church, don't change everything. For some people, church is the only thing that's not changing. Society is so volatile right now. Sometimes you just don't change the music in church. Don't change the preaching in church. Don't change things. Because it's the only stability that some people have. Well, God is stable, and that's what God's law does. It brings us stability. It endures forever, and that it is righteous. And you look at that balance. So we come back to the balance. The first verses, balancing God's creation, the awesomeness of God's creation with the awesomeness of what His law can do. And when those two are kept in balance, things are incredible. We live in this great society. I want you to imagine this. Imagine a world where nobody lies, nobody cheats, nobody takes what's not theirs, nobody kidnaps and holds somebody hostage, nobody shoots somebody else, nobody gives somebody else substances that are killing them, nobody does bad things, nobody bullies anybody. When we make mistakes, we quickly own up to it, apologize, and get things taken care of. Imagine that society. It's not utopia. It's not utopia. Webster says utopia is an imaginary place. An imaginary place where the government laws and social conditions are perfect. Psalm 19, and holding those two things in balance is not utopia. It is godliness. And unlike utopia, godliness is attainable. Godliness is attainable. We can reach that. if we allow God to work, if we hold this and other things in balance. Astounded by the glory of creation, balanced with being speechless by the amazing glory of God's law. And that will transform us. It will transform our church. It will transform our society into this godly place which is held in balance. And those are the two things. We can't overbalance on law because we become legalistic. We can't overbalance on worshiping or watching creation because we just become too wishy-washy. But when held in balance, when seeing what God has done and standing in awe of that, when seeing what God has written or said and keeping that in balance, then life is good. The boundaries are set up and we live a full and complete and exciting life because we hold those two things in balance. Now the psalm doesn't end there. As the writer has seen what God has done in creation, when he sees what he has written in his word, he's overwhelmed by his own condition. He says in verses 12 to 14, "Who could understand his errors? Cleanse me from my secret faults. Keep back your servant from presumptuous sin. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless. I shall be innocent of great transgression. Lord, let the words of my mouth, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." If you want to memorize a verse, that's a powerful one. Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength or my rock and my redeemer. And again, those two held in balance, rock and redeemer. The heavens declare the glory of God, and it should make us gasp in awe. The rules of God declare God and show us how to live, and they should make us gasp in awe when we see them exercised properly. We should not just look, we should see. We should see God in creation and in His Word. One day, two people went to church. One was well known and admired in the community. He held a position of respect. He was a good father and husband. He had a good reputation of honesty and integrity. He paid his bills on time, regularly gave tithes and offerings to his church. As he stood in church, he observed the splendor of the sanctuary, the fine wood pulpit, the stained glass windows, the high vaulted ceiling, and he stood tall knowing that all was well. The other man was not really well known in the community. He was not admired. Those who did know him did not respect him. He had had several failed marriages. He struggled disciplining his kids. Nobody really believed he was honest, and there were whisperings about his morals and his morality. He had a pile of overdue bills. He hadn't been in church for a very, very, very long time. And as he stood in the church, he saw the glory of God reflected in the beauty of the room, and it made him cringe against the back wall. The one reveled in who he thought he was, the other cringed in who he knew he was. One saw church, one saw God, one left comfortable, one left redeemed, forgiven. The heavens declare the glory of God, but if you don't see God, then all you see is stuff. The Word of God declares the glory of God, but we need to see God in it. And when we see God in creation, and when we see God in His Word, we have balance. And we leave and we live redeemed. Not because we see creation, and not because we see His law, but because we see Him. We see God. And that's what balance seeks to do. It seeks to guide us to God. The heavens declare the glory of God. The law of the Lord is perfect. Find balance. Let's pray. Father, we do thank you for the